Good morning, you guys. Before I start the lecture video for the nervous system, just kind of wanted to show you the calendar for this new upcoming unit. So we just took the skeletal system test. Now, I don't have those graded just yet, but I will have them for you next class. So you can do test corrections then. But notice how we have something fun coming up here in the next couple weeks. We are going to be dissecting a sheep's brain. So just kind of wanted to get you guys mentally ready for that. So for Red Day, that's going to be October 24th, and then White Day, October 25th, will be brain dissection. So I'm only going to set aside one day for that. So that'll be a pretty busy but fun day. So yeah, just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention before we got started. Okay, so I uploaded the nervous system. I found a lot of really good videos for this nervous system unit. Specifically, you can see that Crash Course is probably my favorite, but there are a couple other ones like the Amoeba Sisters and Professor Dave, so make sure to check those out. If you haven't already, go ahead and turn in your skeletal projects on my desk and make sure you put them in the right period. I think period 6 is on the left, period 3 is on the right side. And I did put little post-it notes there. So just make sure that you have done that. So we're going to do a little intro to the nervous system. And then you guys have a vocabulary matching activity that you're going to do with a partner. Now I posted the directions here, so please just take a look at that before you start. There should be little baggies in a turquoise box up at the front of the room, so just make sure you and your partner go grab one of those and then complete the assignment by matching the correct vocab word with the correct definition, and then take a picture of that and put it into Shobi. But like I said, read through the directions first, because like I said, there are like critical details that I do want, like no more than 10 vocab words with a definition per picture. That way I can like easily read everyone's term and definition properly, and then just give you some feedback along the way. Here's some vocab for you, and then yeah, I'll be there next class. So we'll go ahead and get started. Student note page. Let's see, you can see that there are 14 pages, okay? That's because Senses is actually attached to this note page, but we're actually gonna go up to here, so page 8 for this unit, and I'll fix that, but just wanted to kind of bring that to your guys' attention. That way you don't freak out like, oh my gosh, this is another big unit. It's 8 pages, so no need to worry. Okay, let's get started. All right, guys, the nervous system. So before we start, I want you to think of all the decisions you have made today so far. And that can be like, did you decide whether to press your snooze button 10 times today? What you were going to wear to school today, whether or not you should go to Starbucks, or whether you should study for a quiz or do your homework. So these are all examples of like what your nervous system does for you. And all of these thoughts are processed and executed by electrical and chemical signals to and from your nerve cells. So your nervous system literally controls all the things. It detects impulses from the senses, aka the control center, which we learned a couple of units ago. Your control center is your brain. And then these are the major organs, the brain, spinal cord, senses, and nerves. Now, keep in mind, you guys, senses is actually just going to be a 3-day unit. So we're not going to go too much into senses this unit, but just keep in mind that it is part of the nervous system. So all your organs, physiological reactions, your hormone production, literally everything is controlled by your nervous system. Like you wouldn't really be here if it weren't for your nervous system. So I want you to turn to your partner and tell them they would not be here if it weren't for your nervous system, and that you're so thankful that they're here. You don't have to do that, but it's fine. Okay, so in this unit, guys, we're going to talk about the anatomy and physiological aspects of how your nervous system communicates with the rest of your body. So when we talk about your nervous system, we normally talk about several different levels of organization, starting with two main parts, the central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. So your central nervous system is like the main control center. This consists of the brain and the spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system, also known as your PNS, this consists of the other nerves, such as your cranial nerves and your spinal nerves. So your cranial nerves originate in the brain, right? Cranial, we learned that in both Unit 1 and skeletal, right? Cranium, cranial, think brain, and then spinal nerves, right? Spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system is further divided, and which we'll get into in just a bit. But just keep in mind that with the PNS, all the nerves branched off from the brain and the spine allow your central nervous system to communicate with the rest of the body. And the overall job is really just communication, and it is set up to work in both directions. So, like I said, let's go ahead and talk more about PNS and its directions. Okay, so okay, so peripheral nervous system has two different types of divisions. We have sensory or afferent division, which picks up stimuli like, for example, like, hey, there's a spider on my arm, and that will send information to your brain. So it sends impulses from the senses to the central nervous system, okay? So literally like think sensory, like if you feel something on your arm, that's like you're sensing it, and it's going to send a signal to your brain like, hey, there's a spider on your arm. You might want to do something about it. And then there's another one called motor efferent division. And what that does is it sends impulses from the central nervous system to the muscle and the glands. So it's really the part that sends directions from the brain to the rest of your body. So like your sensory division says, hey, there's a spider on your arm, you might want to do something about it. And then your motor division says, hey, you should try and use your hand to try and get that spider off of your arm. Okay, so the motor division also includes two different types of systems. We have the autonomic nervous system, which is involuntary muscle control. This is like breathing, blinking, etc. And then we have your somatic nervous system, which is like your voluntary muscle control. So this is like, I don't know, like walking, like moving your head like up and down when you're nodding yes, stuff like that. So just make sure you know the difference between involuntary and voluntary. And lastly, your autonomic nervous system is broken up into two different divisions. So sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic gets the body all fired up, like, oh my God, there's a spider on my arm. This is kind of like your fight or flight, right? If you're getting chased by a tiger or a cheetah, then your sympathetic division gets triggered, right? So it's used in like emergency case situations. Whereas parasympathetic, that is completely opposite. This kind of like relaxes the body and like calms it down. So it reduces that sympathetic response and provides resting functions such as digestion and urination. So if we're still, using our spider analogy, once we get the spider off, it tells your hand to relax and calm the body down because now the spider is off of your body, right? And the spider's off your body. You don't want to keep like, waving your hand all crazy, right? So your parasympathetic kind of comes into play and balances everything out. So that's the level of organization of the nervous system. Kind of think of it as like the level of organization that we talked about back in Unit 1, where we had, the cell, the tissue, the organ system, organism. It's really just like the same thing. So hopefully that wasn't too bad. Okay. So what are the major functions of the nervous system? So Like I said earlier, the nervous system is the master control center for the body, and it works with the endocrine system. Your endocrine system actually really just like bows down to the nervous system, but they actually work really closely together. And for those of you that don't know, the endocrine system releases hormones. So when you think of endocrine system, think automatically hormones. And your endocrine system releases those hormones, but it has to get a signal from the nervous system in order to do so. So that's why it really just depends on the nervous system and what signals it's sending. Okay, so to do this kind of job, it uses these three things. So sensory input, so it detects changes inside and outside the body, right? We already talked about sensory. When you think sensory, think senses. It's detecting changes from inside and outside the body. Integration, processing, and interpreting that information, and then response. So activation of muscle, motor output, or glands. Okay. So this, guys, is really just like that sensory division that we were talking about. And then this is going to be, I'm going to go back here. This is going to be like the motor division here. Okay, so the first two are sensory, then we got your motor division here. Sorry, let me backtrack. Okay, so sensory input, integration, response. That's how it does it in order. Okay, so before we get into the structure of what a nerve cell looks like, let's do a little summary. So the nervous system controls the body by receiving sensory input, right? So like, hey, there's a spider on your arm. You should do something about it. And that comes from the peripheral nervous system. And then integrating messages into that central nervous system and then responding through the peripheral nervous system. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but remember that your central nervous system is really just like your brain and your spinal cord, whereas peripheral is like everything else, right? So we have that spider's on your arm, sends a message to your central nervous system, and then goes back to the peripheral nervous system like, okay, let's put it into action. Let's get the spider off of our arm. The PNS is divided into somatic, aka voluntary, and automatic, which is involuntary sections. Now remember, voluntary is like when you're shaking your head yes or no, when you are picking up your cup and you're drinking it or drinking whatever is in it. Whereas like involuntary, you're not really thinking about doing it, you're just doing it, right? So like blinking and breathing is a good example of involuntary sections. Okie dokes. So let's go ahead and move on to the anatomy of a nerve cell. So there are different types of nerve cells, and you've probably heard of these terms before, which is great. So the first one is called neurons, and these are also known as your nerve cells. And these conduct impulses around the body, and they only make up about 10% of nerve cells. So these guys really just respond to stimuli and transmit signals around your body. And these nerve cells are surrounded or protected by something called neuroglia. And this is kind of, think of this as like the nerve glue. These are also called your glial cells, GLIAL, glial cells. And what these do is that they support, insulate, and protect neurons. And these actually make up about 90% of nerve cells. And they have many different functions, but they mainly provide support, nutrition, insulation, and just many other things. And you can kind of get a visual representation of what each of these structures look like. Okay. So your neurons have a pretty basic structure. But all of your neurons have what's called a cell body, aka soma. So if you hear the word soma, SOMA, that's just another name for cell body. And this is really just like the neurons life support. And then this is where you can find like your DNA, your nucleus, mitochondria, ribosome, cytoplasm, you name it. And you'll notice that there are these processes that are extending outward. Oh, sorry, kind of forgot to click on that. Anyways, you'll notice that there are these processes that are kind of like branchy, like structures, if you will. So let me kind of backtrack here. This is the cell body right here. You can see that the nucleus is right there with all your DNA. So this is your cell body or your soma. And now you'll notice that there are these like branchy like structures that are coming off of it. So let's go ahead and talk about those here for a sec. If you need to go ahead and pause the video and label that, go for it, but I'm just going to go ahead and keep on moving forward. Okay, so these processes that I'm talking about, or like these branch-like structures that are hanging off the cell body, those are called dendrites. Okay, so dendrites, what they do is they bring impulses towards the cell body. So I want you guys to think of dendrites as like the listeners because they pick up messages or like news, or even like just think of it as like gossip from other cells that have information from the rest of your body. So the information from your body that's being taken in from the outside, your dendrites are the first ones to receive that message. Okay, next we have your axons, and I want you to kind of think of these guys as like the gossiper or like the talker. Because they send impulses away from the cell body, right? So we have your dendrites here that take in the information from your body. It goes through the cell body, and then this whole structure right here is your axon. So it sends impulses away from the cell body. So again, think of your axon as like the gossiper or the talker. It's sending that information to the next step. And then you'll notice at the end of the axon is something called axon terminal. And those are going to be at the end of the axon, so away from the dendrites. Okay. And what axon terminals do is they release what are called neurotransmitters to pass impulses to the next neuron. Okay, so they receive that message from the axon, and then they send it to the neurotransmitter so it can send it to the next neuron so they can do its job. So really, guys, it's kind of like I said earlier, it's kind of like gossiping, right? If the message gets sent here, it gets sent here, it gets sent all the way over here to the next structure. Kind of think of it like that. Okay, what's going on? There we go. Okay, what are the types of neurons? So neurons are classified by the number of processes extending from the cell body, right? Like, so how do scientists, how do anatomists, how do neurosurgeons, shout out McDreamy if you guys watch Grey's Anatomy, how do they know the difference between one neuron versus another neuron under a microscope? I will show you how. So, before we get into like what they are, it's important to note that nerve cells are not identical because they are different in structure, and that's how we can classify them and tell them apart. So the specific feature that we look at is how many processes extend out from the cell body. And if you don't know what a process is, you guys, it's something that can be projected out from a structure, kind of like you can see here. Okay, these are processes. So wow, I can't talk. Unipolar neurons, they just have one process. And that can mainly be found in like sensory receptors. The second one is called bipolar neurons, and those are two processes. Now, guys, I know you guys know your prefixes, but I just wanted to point it out. If you guys see like uni or UNI, that means one, right? So it just has one process. If you see bi, that means two. So it has two processes. And then we have multipolar neurons, and these make up about 99% of your neurons. And these have three or more processes sticking out of that cell body or that soma. And yeah, cool. Oh, just a real quick thing, guys. Bipolar neurons, these are super rare. But you can actually find these in the retina of your eye, just in case you were curious. But again, these are very super rare. Multipolar neurons are probably the most abundant in a living thing. That could be a test question, you guys. So just kind of make note of that. Again, bipolar neurons are pretty rare. Multipolar neurons are abundant. Neurons can also be classified by their function. So we kind of talked about these earlier in that levels of organization slide. So we have afferent neurons, which carry impulses towards the central nervous system. And then we have efferent neurons, which carry impulses away from the nervous system. Okay. Oh, I forgot. And then interneurons connect those afferent and afferent neurons. So they're like the bridge. They connect both of those neurons. Okay, so in summary, neurons only make up about 10% of the nervous system tissue, but they are essential cells for carrying impulses around the body. The impulses pass through the processes and into the cell body. Neurons can be classified by the number of processes they have or by their function. So like I said, we talked about three of them: unipolar neurons, bipolar neurons, and multipolar neurons. And just a reminder that bipolar is the most rare, whereas multipolar, that is the most abundant, makes up about 99% of your nerve cells. Okay. We're almost done, guys. So myelin sheath, let's go ahead and talk about what this guy means. So axons are wrapped around, axons are wrapped in what are called myelin. And myelin is actually considered to be a lipid because it's like a waxy insulation. To form the myelin, there's something called a Schwann cell, and this is a type of neuroglia, and it wraps itself around the axon, kind of like a coil, if you will. And you can kind of see like a little demonstration here. So you have your Schwann cell, okay, which is right here, and it wraps around the axon. The Schwann cell then rotates around the axon, forming like certain layers, and then the myelin sheath is formed. So you can see the difference between this guy and this guy. Here's a Schwann cell. It's kind of going around and around, and it's creating layers almost. And like, look how many layers there are here compared to here. Okay, so that's what's called the myelin sheath. And it's important to note, you guys, that the myelin sheath doesn't cover the entire nerve cell. It just covers that axon portion, which is only like that long part of the nerve cell. And the outer layer of the Schwann cell, those are called neurolema. Neurolema. Okay. So myelin helps the nerve impulses to travel more quickly. If we didn't really have the myelin sheath, it would just go a lot slower, or maybe that nerve impulse won't even make it to the next neuron. So myelin sheath is really, really important. And for some like older people, or just even some younger people as well, like they don't have this myelin sheath and their nervous system isn't able to work as well. So we can get into that in a couple classes from now when we talk about like diseases and stuff like that. Collectively, the myelin wrappings are called the myelin sheath. Okay, like you can see here in this image right here. And since the myelin sheath is formed by many Schwann cells, it has gaps called nodes of Ranvier. So you'll notice that the myelin sheath is not connected all the way through. They have like these little gaps right here, and that is called nodes of Ranvier. And you'll just notice how they're spaced out. And these more or less like propagate the electrical signal going down the axon, and then the signal just rapidly jumps from node to node. Okay. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about neuroglial cells. So within the central nervous system, you do have specific neuroglial cells that I want you guys to know, and then we'll kind of jump into PNS. I think central nervous system has about 4, whereas PNS only has 2, so hang in there. Central nervous system have what are called astrocytes. And what astrocytes do is they exchange materials back and forth between neurons and capillaries, and they kind of like anchor down those neurons to their blood supply. So astrocytes support and anchor neurons to support capillaries. I like this one, protective microglia. This has a really big part in your immune system. In structure, they're very small and they're very like thorny like. You can kind of see like the thorn like structures they have right here. Kind of think of like microglia as like the soldiers that protect your body from like bad invading microorganisms that take over your brain and spinal cord. Epidermal cells, these secrete and circulate cerebral spinal fluid. And what epidermal cells do is they line the cavity of the brain and the spinal cord, and it circulates that cerebral spinal fluid so that it cushions those organs. And you can kind of see like how they're literally look like a cushion here on the right side. And then this is kind of a fun word, oligodendrites. Say that 5 times fast. These provide myelin insulation to neurons in the central nervous system. So they kind of like wrap around neurons and provide like an insulated barrier, which is known as the myelin sheath. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, here are just some like visual representations here for you, so you can kind of get a better idea of what they look like. Okay, now let's jump to the peripheral nervous system and what neuroglial cells you can find there. So like I said earlier, you can only find 2 here. Not too bad. So in the peripheral nervous system, we have satellite cells, and what these do is they support and anchor neurons in the peripheral nervous system. So they have a very similar function to the astrocytes in the central nervous system. Remember that astrocytes exchange materials between neurons and capillaries. And so what the satellite cells do is they surround and support the cell bodies. And lastly, we have the Schwann cells, which you guys are already familiar with. They provide myelin insulation to neurons in the peripheral nervous system, and they're very similar to the oligodendrites, where they wrap around the axons and make that insulating myelin sheath. Okay, there's your labeling. And we did it, you guys. So in summary, neurons pass impulses to or from the central nervous system. The axon is then covered by a myelin sheath, which is formed by Schwann cells. Neuroglial cells help to produce this insulation or support and anchor neurons and provide immune response or secrete cerebral spinal fluid to cushion those organs. Ooh, all right. That was a lot, you guys. You did it. Congratulations. So what you guys are going to do next is you guys are going to practice some of these vocab terms. So, I mean, to me, there was a lot of vocab that we went over. So what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to go up to the front of the room, grab a little baggie, and you're going to dump all of those like little card pieces onto your desk. And you are going to try and match up those vocab terms with its correct definition. Now, if you want to, you can try and challenge yourself and try to complete this activity without using your notes. But if you kind of get stuck, feel free to go back in your notes and check. And you can do this activity as many times as you want to. The only thing is I ask that you do leave it in class and don't take it home with you, because I do have another class working on this next class. But you are more than welcome to use them at any point in time during this unit, because like I said, there is a lot of vocab, as you can see here. And the quicker you understand these terms, the better you're going to be for the upcoming test. Okay. So if you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to email me. Otherwise, I will see you guys next class. Thank you so much. Talk to you later. Bye.